Good evening. My name is Einor Sawyer. I'm an orthopedist here at UCSF, but I'm fortunate to work in innovation ventures as well. And so I'll be kicking off this session tonight. First of all, thank you all for coming. I know it's an incredibly busy time of year and busy week as everyone's ramping up. I hope you're all getting set up for some lovely holiday time and maybe some respite, but most of us in academia consider holiday and vacation time to catch up on work, which needs to be investigated, but that's how we think. But I'm really excited tonight because we've got such a great panel of speakers. This is the UCSF Innovator Seminar Series. And just as background, it's produced by Innovation Ventures and particularly the Innovator Enrichment Program. We'll talk a little bit about the resources. We do that at the beginning of each one of these. It's about a monthly series, and what we're doing is laying a foundation for an innovator curriculum, for a frontline innovator curriculum at UCSF, eventually with a certificate. So your input on each of these sessions is really valuable in building out that curriculum. These are some of the topics that we think would be helpful. Everyone in this room obviously has an interest in innovation, and we have people all the way from pre-innovators to serial or seasoned innovators in the room, from learners to senior faculty, and we also have a whole cadre of people on Zoom right now as well. Each session is recorded. You can get to the links of the prior sessions in the follow-up email after this meeting. We'll send you the links each time. But these are some of the topics that are very helpful if you're considering being an innovator and you want to move your idea from idea to impact. But these aren't things we get taught in our curricula of health and life sciences, no matter what our specialty is. So you have to build this fund of knowledge on your own, and we're going to try to help facilitate that here at UCSF for our frontline innovators. So those are some samples. Tonight we're going to have a little intro, then we're going to get right into the program. We have three fantastic presenters, and Nate's going to do an introduction as soon as I get through this resource bit of it. And then we'll have a Q&A, and then there'll be time for more in-person networking. The Q&A also for people on Zoom, be sure to post your questions, and we'll be making sure we bring those to the front of the room also. We are really fortunate at UCSF. We have institutional level support for innovation. And one of these quotes from Catherine Lucy really sums it up, that UCSF's top priorities include inspiring, identifying, and investing in frontline innovators who are translating novel ideas into beneficial impact at scale for health and life sciences. So we're really fortunate that this institution and the leadership, as well as the tiers of people involved in innovation, are here to support you in this and help you develop. And to speak to that, we have a new leader for Innovation Ventures, Dr. David Morris, who's Vice Chancellor of UCSF Innovation Ventures. And most of you know Dr. Peter Kotsonis, who is the Assistant Vice Chancellor at Innovation Ventures. And basically what we do in Innovation Ventures is we do try to move your great ideas from idea to impact. So we look for novel, potentially impactful and scalable ideas and help you move through that complicated journey all the way across to what we would call some sort of an exit or licensing out from the university. But there are many steps, and some of you, how many have already submitted a disclosure that are in the room? People who know what that is, yeah, invention disclosure. So a few, but once you have an idea, what's really important is to understand, is it a novel idea? And if it is, how do you start protecting it as soon as possible? And that's not to keep it hidden, because what we want to have in the end is impact. But you protect it in ways that allow you to be strategic about how you develop it and what kind of leverage you can get from it. And that's what tonight is all about. And it's hard for us sometimes on the front lines to understand what our value is. So I'm going to speak to that in just a minute. But these are the pillars within Innovation Ventures and the types of services we offer, from the tech transfer or Office of Technology Management and Advancement. We have one of the leaders, Kristin Agopian, is here tonight to represent. Office of Strategic Alliances, where we build big partnerships with outside institutions, because oftentimes it's those intersections that help us make inflection points and create hybrid vigor. And then we have funding mechanisms and an internal accelerator Catalyst, and Nate is a leader in that program. And then the Innovator Enrichment Program, which is new this past year, and that's one that I head up in collaboration with others, and the entrepreneurship program. Some of you may have heard about this already, but we do have a global entrepreneurship program that was launched by Stephanie Maris, and Indertarkar helps with that program, and they've been doing this for a number of years. Watch for the next announcement. It'll come late summer, and there's a fall course that just completed, but that's a really exciting program, and you'll meet innovators from all over the world who sign up for this online program. In the Catalyst Awards, again, this is our internal accelerator. This is incredibly exciting. It's not just money, but you get surrounded by multidisciplinary advice, and that's some of our speakers here tonight have helped us in many ways in that program. And this is a way that you can move your idea forward to its next level, and you develop as an innovator to your next level as well. So we're building innovators, not just innovations here at UCSF. There is an internship program with Catalyst. So by the way, Catalyst goes through the RAP application process here at UCSF. You will have heard of that when you start applying for grants. Early in the fall, you'll see a lot of different listings. So start watching in August, but go online and learn about Catalyst ahead of time, because that's a real growth spurt if you get into Catalyst and move your project through there. If you want to learn about Catalyst and actually what does it take, but you don't have your own project yet, you can sign up as an intern, and this is a QR code that'll take you to that program. Those applications start in May. Innovator enrichment, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the concept is we really need to go upstream, not wait for the disclosure to come to the door and then engage with our frontline innovators, but go way upstream and find pre-innovators, people who are even just interested but not sure where to go yet, and work all the way across that whole spectrum. And we say oftentimes, no bees, no honey. So this picture is one that I found that shows upstream and bees. Not sure how I got so lucky, but there's that photo, and that's what it means. We're going upstream, and we're going to really concentrate on the bees, not just wait for the innovations to come in. So again, inspiring, identifying, and investing in our frontline innovators. And we also want to diversify our innovation and our innovator population. And so you'll learn a lot about this by going on the Innovator website. One of the things that we're launching early January is Innovator consultations. So this means you can go in and schedule an appointment for yourself with one of our seasoned innovation consultants within Innovator enrichment in the innovation program. And we can help act as air traffic controllers or get you to the next right person or right step. So we're going to move forward. I want to just make one note that in January, instead of having this, we're going to be having the UCSF Innovation Showcase down at JP Morgan downtown on January 15th. You'll see lots of news about that coming around, but that'll be instead of this series in January. So let's move on to tonight's agenda, because this is really, really important stuff. I'm a faculty member and I'm a frontline innovator, and I work in the innovation office. But one thing I know over and over is that we on the front lines of health and life sciences, we often underestimate our value. We don't know that even our ideas have value or answers to questions that people are asking us, say from industry. As subject matter experts, that even has value in a consultant type form. So if you're speaking to people outside of the university, it's really important to know that you have value. You're someone who has built a brain trust of knowledge in your field, in your specialty, or you're developing it further. So think about your own value when you're interacting with other people. And then as you build out novel ideas, you're solving problems that you're facing every day, and you come up with a solution you haven't seen yet. That's really important to sort out. First of all, is it novel? By doing some due diligence, probably is, or you would have seen something off the shelf and just used that instead. But is it novel, and how is that determined? And then also, as you're sharing that idea, sharing with inside the university, obviously we're all colleagues, we're in the same family here, and under the same contract. I think that part is easy for us, but it's when you get excited and you're sharing it with people outside of the university. How do you decide what should be maybe protected first under some sort of an agreement like an NDA first, or how do you speak in non-proprietary terms about it instead of proprietary? So we're going to learn a little bit more about that tonight. And then what are the different ways things might be protected once that's that's determined that probably they should. So instead of going further into areas that I have way less expertise than these three women in the room, I'm going to move forward into the program here. And thank you very much to Kristin, Erica, and Pilar for being here tonight. And we're going to start with Kristin and Pilar. Erica and Pilar. And then we're going to move over to Kristin. Okay. Sorry, this is a very important person. This is Nate Prorock, and he's my colleague in the Innovator seminars, but he does many, many other things here. I've already mentioned Catalyst. I should mention that he also runs the Launchpad program, but he is an incredible resource. So as you go through the evening tonight, make sure you get his contact information, and he's going to introduce our speakers.
Great. Thank you very much, Einar. We have a great program today. These are two of my favorite people who work consistently with the Catalyst program. They attend a lot of the Catalyst pitch sessions if you can think of a Shark Tank, that's kind of like what the Catalyst finalist pitches is, but it's more of a dolphin tank because we have such nice people like Pilar and Erica. Whenever a question about intellectual property comes up, whether in the live session or in the application review, both Erica and Pilar have been fantastic resources for the UCSF Innovators through the Catalyst program. And now this is fantastic that they'll be able to share a lot of their resources and insights and experience with you all here today. So Pilar is the CEO and founder of Ingensity IP. She has
That's me.
excuse me, Erica. Erica is the founder and CEO of Ingensity IP. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Biology from MIT, a PhD in Biochemistry and Molecular Biology from UC Berkeley, and a JD from California Western School of Law. Her experience includes strategic advice for life science companies, IP due diligence, litigation risk assessment, false advertising and trade secret protection, and she is a registered patent attorney with the USPTO. Erica is a frequent author of articles and posts about the life science industry and the intersection of business and law. And Pilar, for more than 15 years, she has helped her clients, including universities, research organizations, corporations, and private individuals, enforce and defend their commercial and intellectual property and civil rights. Her experience includes significant successful representations involving licensing disputes, breach of contract, patent infringement, copyrights, trade secrets, and civil rights. Pilar has a JD from UC Law San Francisco and a BS from UC Santa Cruz in molecular and cell biology. Pilar now leads the Live Oak Law office. So without further ado, thank you very much for being here. The floor is yours.
That's still us, except me much, much younger with much less gray hair. All right. So this is sort of like a recap of the topics. Not going to spend a lot of time here, but the two of us are going to try to cover the different types of intellectual property, kind of what they are, and some other considerations that we'll get into related to intellectual property. I, on the other hand, am mostly going to concentrate out of these four types on the one on the left, which is patents. But there are many types of intellectual property. I mean, any know-how, everything from know-how to things you keep trade secret, meaning you keep that stuff secret, to copyright, to trademark, right? All intellectual property. And Pilar will cover a lot of that. Like I said, I'm going to focus on patents. And the reason I'm going to do that before I get into these general properties is what I do on a day-to-day kind of thing when I'm not standing here is I work with startup companies from about the pre-seed stage to about Series C. What does that mean if you haven't dealt in the startup world? I work with a lot of people like you who come up with ideas at the university, and they've already gone through Kristin and the university, right? So she's going to talk about that part. That's your stop one. And they've now left the university and started their own company, right? And so they're doing things like licensing technology from the university, developing new ideas, bringing people into the company, right, who will bring more ideas, and protecting those through patents. And patents, right, are really important for the biotech and the therapeutic and the diagnostic industry. It's a little different if you worked, for example, on apps, and I really shouldn't talk about apps because I'm like the worst person, like TikTok and sorry, can't tell you much about them, but that's not a big, things like that, or some consumer products, their product cycles are too fast, right? So we're going to talk about patents. What are they, right? They're protection. They last for 20 years. For 20 years, you control that idea, or in your case, the university does, right? They own that idea and they can give it to other people, right? They can sell it, they can license it, right? But they have control of that technology. And so that's what makes it important to file patents. One of the things to keep in mind is they're country specific, right? So if you file a patent in the US, you can protect your idea in the US. You want to protect your idea in Argentina, you're going to have to file a patent in Argentina, right? They're not really into the US, they don't use our patents, we don't use theirs. One of the things that you want to keep in mind is that patent applications do publish. They're not a secret, right? After a certain amount of time, they become public and other people can read about your ideas and the ideas that truthfully, they can improve upon them. That's what the patent system is meant to do. And they publish before they're granted. That becomes a consideration, right? If you're trying to develop technology and you want to be sort of first in your field, right? You're going to have to keep in mind that, once something publishes, just like you read things and want to improve on them, so will other people. The other thing you'll keep in mind is that patents go through an application process, right? They go to the patent office and it's a negotiation back and forth, right? I always say to my clients, you can't own the world. You might think of it like a Christmas list. You might ask for the bicycle, but sometimes you just get the pair of socks, right? Or in my case, that sometimes happens, right? Sometimes you get, something intermediate. But you have to be realistic. You're trying to get protection for what you've invented. But for example, I'll be more realistic. Like if you come up with an antibody, let's say an antibody that binds to PD-1, the patent office is not going to let you own every antibody that could bind to PD-1. They're going to let you own a subset that are related to the antibody that you cloned. So, just to give you an idea of the timeline, and this is a timeline after it leaves the hands of the technology transfer office. This is after your invention disclosure, and I'm not going to talk about that process of how you go from idea to invention disclosure to that first step, right? Because that's what Kristin is going to tell you about. But once you go to file a patent application, usually when we're sitting here in the US, and often, there are other variations of this, you file what's called a provisional application. This is where you put something into the patent office saying, this is my idea and I came up with it, right? But as of this date, right, I am submitting it to get a patent. And it sits there for a year, right? And that's important because it's actually a really important year. During that year, you can actually add data. You can add, variations to your idea. You can enhance it, right? Because it's kind of a living document in a way. But at 12 months, it converts to what's called either a PCT or non-provisional application. PCT is short for Patent Cooperation Treaty. It's just a treaty that many countries sign. Think of it like the Common College app, right? When you apply to college, you can just fill out one application. In theory, I've heard that's not really true, and you got to write essays for everyone. But, in this case, right, think of it like that. You file one application, and for most countries, right, that PCT application will allow you eventually, if you want to, and you pay them, to get a patent in those various countries. Unfortunately, there were a few countries that either didn't sign the treaty or not allowed to sign the treaty. So if you're really interested in like Argentina, Taiwan, Uruguay, and there's a handful of others, you'll be filing separately in those. And, those seem like faraway places to some of us, but I actually have a lot of clients in Argentina. They have a very big biotech innovation center down there. And so they have to file separately in their country and then file PCT. So there's your 12-month window, right, where you've added data. Now at the PCT, right, that's it. That's your application. And it, again, sits there for another 6 months until it publishes at month 18. And by the way, to the extent you want more information on this or you want the timeline on the slides, happy to send it out. Then after it publishes, the negotiations start at about month 30, and I'm counting the months from when you filed your provisional. That's when you go back and forth with the patent office, not you personally, a patent attorney that you've hired or the university's hired, and you figure out, what is the scope that you can protect of your invention? Do I get just exactly the antibody sequence I filed, or maybe I get the CDR sequences, but the framework can be different? And I'm using antibodies as an example, but it's the same for medical devices or diagnostic assays, right? How broad or how narrow does it go? And then it might take another 1 to 5 years, could take longer, depending on the country. Some countries very, very slow, Brazil and Argentina being 2 of them. And hopefully at the end of this pathway, out comes a patent, right? And that patent will be good 20 years from this PCT application date, more or less. There are technicalities, but we'll stick to that. Okay. I have to go over this one urban legend before I hand this off to Pilar. So a common misconception, and I do not mean just among scientists. I mean, I hear this from investors. I hear this from seasoned entrepreneurs, is that I have a patent, therefore I have freedom to operate. I got a clear path to market. No one can block my way, right? Because my patent, my technology, my device. Well, that is a big false gong. Why? Because patents are like a fence. They tell people to keep out. This is my space, keep out. They're for saying don't use what's in, on patent claims. But it doesn't mean you own it. So quick analogy, when I lived in North Carolina, I had a house, my neighbor had a house, I had a fence, keeps the dog from the neighbor coming over, right? That's my patent, my fence. However, did I own the land that the fence was on? Actually, no. Somehow when they did the survey and they put the fence down, they put it on my neighbor's house, land. Patents can be like that, right? They're like Venn diagrams. You may have a patent on your PD-1 antibody, right? A very specific variant. Someone may have something overlapping. It could be like use of a PD-1 antibody. It could be the same antibody. So just keep that in mind. It's sort of an odd concept. I actually have an article on it that used to be on my website, but that's a long story why it's not. Has something to do with being hacked. But yeah, I will leave that. That's a whole nother story for another day, or over drinks if you ever meet me. And I'm going to hand off to Pilar so we keep on going.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. It's nice to be back in person for a change instead of just on Zoom. Let's see if I have so trademarks. I've put some very common trademarks on this slide. I think trademarks and copyright are probably the intellectual property we're most familiar with. We see it every day. And so I think some people think trademarks, there's not necessarily the same value in them as a patent. But obviously, if you look at, Ford, McDonald's, Starbucks, Nike, we all recognize these without having to be told what they are. And there's a ton of value in them. And the rights are essentially the same as a patent. You can exclude others from using same or similar marks, usually in the same geographic area and usually in the same type of product. So there may be ways for you to get the mark you want in a different product area or in a different geographic region, depending on who's using what where. And the point on that is that what you really want to pay attention to with the trademark is making sure before you pick out a logo or before you pick out a company name that someone else isn't using it. Because some of these companies that do have patents, whether they be word marks or trade dress or logo, they're very aggressive about protecting them. And so you don't want to end up choosing something that you're going to have to change down the line. Because if investors have gotten to know your branding and you've sort of built your company around this, it can be a real hassle to have to change it later. Although you can, and it's not going to be determinative. So trademarks essentially last forever, but you have to have someone, usually your attorney, will track them because you have to maintain them. And so again, you're going to want a practitioner to do a search for you, and you're going to want a practitioner to maintain them. Now, I don't know if it's possible that the tech transfer office is involved in that, but I will let Kristin address that. So in terms of how you get a trademark, you technically can get a trademark by just using the mark, but that is not recommended because you should get it registered with the Patent and Trademark Office. It gives you very essential protection, such as getting more damages, having access to attorney's fees. I think it's statutory damages, attorney's fees, and a few other things. And you can also put a TM after it. You can use it, put a TM after it, or register it. That's sort of the layers of protection. Putting a TM after your name will alert others that you intend to use it as a trademark. So you might do that until it's registered, because it will put it on notice and your ownership will go back to the time when you first started using it. So if you think you want to have a trademark, put a TM after it, and then once it's registered, you get to put that little R after it, in case you were ever wondering what the difference is between the TM and the little tiny R. And trademark registration, generally, it's not like a patent. It's not extremely onerous. It's not really hard. You generally file an application. Sometimes it will be contested. If you've done your homework, it probably won't be, because you are choosing something no one else is using in your field. So I'll just move on, and if anyone has questions about those, you can ask questions. Copyrights, again, something we're all familiar with. It's art, music, publications, books, basically any type of artistic creation in a fixed, tangible medium. That's how it's described. And again, you do not have to do anything to get a copyright. I think it's even, you don't even have to mark it anymore. It's just automatically created the moment you create it. But just like trademarks, you really should register it, because again, you get access to the federal courts. You can't actually sue in federal court to protect your copyright unless you've registered it with the Copyright Office. So that's something to very much keep in mind, because you can mark it with copyright and the year of creation and the name of the author, and that does give you the exclusive right to distribute it, to make copies of it, and to make what are called derivative works of it, which just means variations of the same creation. But it does not give you the right to enforce it in the federal courts. So it's very important to register your copyright. Again, it's not nearly as onerous as the patent filing process. You generally just mail a copy into the Copyright Office. Sometimes they will contest it, but that's usually if you're in a very unusual field. I've had to fight them over a lighting design. So if you're in some very obscure field, you might come across that, but usually you just are awarded it. And they last the life of the author plus 70 years in general. Of course, there are a lot of exceptions. And the last one, I did want to make one point about this, and that is that I have encountered the situation where someone publishes something and they think that the idea in their publication is protected by the copyright. But that is not true. You may need additional protection for the idea through patents or some other type of right, maybe trademark if you're disclosing a business logo or business idea. It can kind of cross over with all the other types of IP. Trade secrets, again, not usually used by universities because it's very hard to control access in a university setting, especially people coming and going in labs. So the way you get a trade secret is simply by not disclosing your secret. You don't apply for anything, you don't have to do anything, you just have to not let other people know about it. And that can be really hard if you don't have a way to take security measures, both digital and physical, locking people out of the space where it's kept. The Google logo is there because their algorithm, their search algorithm is still a trade secret. And a lot of people choose to protect their software with a trade secret because copyright, as I understand it, it's not fast enough to keep up with all the variations that you might have in software. And so people choose just to go ahead and keep it a trade secret. And you basically, with a trade secret, you have to have non-disclosure agreements in place all the time to protect them. in addition to whatever security measures, and you want to limit access. And there's no limit to the length of a trade secret. So the Coca-Cola recipe has been a trade secret forever. There are others like that. As long as it stays secret, you get to keep it. And I understand these slides will be passed out. I actually put links on each of these pages where you can get more information. There's a lot of really good publicly available information about all of these types of IP. So this is just a general slide on what to think about is what, it seems very obvious, but what type of IP do you need? And do you need more than one? Do you want to copyright a publication and also get a patent on the underlying idea or molecule or whatever it is that you're disclosing for the first time? And you definitely want to think about that in advance of publishing, because the tech transfer office is going to want some time if you do need that other kind of IP. So what do you have to do to get whatever protection you need before you disclose? Do you just need an NDA? An NDA can cover anything. It can cover any of these types of IP that we've talked about. Patents, just don't disclose it until you have a provisional in place. Used to be a little bit more flexible, but now that it's first to file, it's just get that provisional in place first, as soon as you can. Copyrights and trademarks, think about if you can register it, because you get enormous benefits from that. And with trademarks, do a thorough search, because you really want to make sure you're not going to have to change that information later. And then trade secrets, of course, are you actually going to be able to defensively say you could keep other people from finding out about your trade secret? This is just a little summary. I'm not going to go over this again, but just to describe these in the handout. Oh, and that's it. So, Kristin or Nate? Okay.
First of all, let's thank these first two speakers. And I'm just going to do a very quick transition here, but thank you. That was really incredible. We asked them something really difficult. Could you give us a primer on this incredibly complex field? So we've got some working vocabulary and some framework, and I think you did a really nice job distilling that for us. And we can use these references. I want to point out one thing I mentioned earlier about NDA, and I said it very quickly, and I'm glad you brought it up several times. But Kristin's going to give us more guidance on this. But knowing your value also means not just talking with industry people, but when you're presenting or you're doing posters or you're doing abstracts or you're publishing, understanding that your ideas have value and you need to understand which ones need what kind of protection before you make them public. Because once you've done that, it changes your leverage. And I think Kristin's going to talk about this. Nate's going to do the next introduction. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Heiner, and thanks both to Erica and Pilar for that really good primer. It's so important to get these baseline foundational ideas, and I'm looking forward to our Q&A later after this next presentation. So keep thinking of your questions so we could continue this robust conversation. We're very fortunate to have Kristin Agopian here today. She is our in-house UCSF expert who will guide us through how all intellectual property is managed at UCSF and how we get our ideas, our innovations from our mind, from our labs, moving them through the right steps towards licensing, startups, et cetera, et cetera. Kristin has over 10 years of business development experience and licensing experience as well. She is currently the licensing team lead for therapeutics and diagnostics within Innovation Ventures. She works closely with UCSF Innovators to prioritize, develop, and partner their innovations for commercial development. Kristin holds a PhD in virology from Harvard and an AB in molecular biology from Princeton. So again, thank you very much for being here, Kristin.
Thanks, Nate, for that lovely introduction. And thanks to Pilar and Erica for the very quick primer on a very complicated and difficult field. So before I get started, just wanted to comment a little bit on what they brought up. As you can see, they went through it very quickly. It is much more complex and involved than that quick overview showed. And there's many different types of IP, as Pilar mentioned. We don't expect you all as innovators here at the university to manage this on your own and to navigate this on your own. And that's why we're here. And so when you're thinking about this and you're contemplating, maybe I have an idea, maybe I have something that's valuable, we really ask you to come talk to us. And we can work with you to navigate through all these steps and all these processes. So I've already talked a little, other folks already talked about Innovation Ventures. So we are here today to talk to you from Innovation Ventures. This is just another version of Einar's slide, but basically Innovation Ventures has different aspects and different offices within it. The group that I am with is the Office of Technology Management and Advancement, where we really focus on commercialization. There's also Strategic Alliances, which aims towards collaborations. The Entrepreneurship Center and Innovator Enrichment, which focus on education and enriching folks here, and then Catalyst and Invent Fund, which focus on the internal funding and support here within the university. So today I'm going to talk about the technology management and advancement, who we are, what we do, how we do it, and how you can work with us. So basically what we do is we work with the UCSF innovators, yourselves, established companies and investors, and bring them all together with the goal of partnering to get products to patients. It's very simple, but that's the main thing. We want to commercialize innovations for patient benefit, and we do this by either building companies or growing relationships with existing companies using a market-first approach. So this is our office. This is the OTMA. There's quite a few of us. Doctors Todd Pezdera and Gonzalo Barrera Hernandez lead the OTMA, and the OTMA as a whole supports intellectual property and commercialization activities at the university. So OTMA, our goal is to partner with innovators, you all, using a product focus to help build companies and license products. So what steps does our office take towards commercialization? Well, there's several things we do, and I've tried to list them here kind of in the order in which we do it, which is we evaluate and grow new ideas. So that's when you come to us first with your first idea. We assess the market, we look at business models, we strategize protection of intellectual property. We have outside attorneys. None of us are patent attorneys in the office, but we work with outside counsel, expert patent attorneys in the various fields to protect that IP. And then we connect with industry, investors, and key opinion leaders to learn more about the potential of that particular intellectual property. We build startups. We match innovators with executives and residents to work together on this. We pitch to investors. We value the technology, and then in the end, if everything goes well, we negotiate the licenses. So what is a market-first approach? That's kind of how we think about everything that we do. You take an idea, you test it against the market. You talk to key opinion leaders, you talk to the market, you try to get feedback. You define the product. So what is the product? What is the business model? And that's guided by the market assessment. And there's a bit of a feedback loop there. So there's a step in there that is, okay, we get an invention disclosure, which might be an invention, but that might not necessarily be a product. And so you sometimes have to shift thinking a little bit from, okay, here's the idea, but what is the ultimate commercial product? So then we refine and prioritize. This is sort of the feedback loop where we leverage the VC and industry feedback that we get to prioritize our opportunities. And then we enhance by filling gaps and providing resources. So sometimes folks will come back and say, well, often it's too early. Oh, I wish we had this, wish we had that. And we can provide that feedback to folks to see if we can fill those gaps and fill those needs and use resources such as Catalyst or Invent or Innovator Enrichment, any of these things that we have here on campus to to meet that need and position those opportunities for success and commercial value. All right, so why do we do this? So a simple answer is that we believe that this process makes us more effective in helping to get products to the market. The process provides an evidence-based and market-determined approach to prioritizing opportunities. New ideas are assessed from a product perspective in context of market fit and competitive landscape, not purely patentability to help identify those that have the strongest potential and patient impact. We've also found that the process helps us have a more entrepreneurial and interactive conversation with our inventor clients. And finally, the process supports our active participation in adding value and positioning the opportunities for success. So it's kind of a funnel, as you can see here. You have the market research, competitive analysis, KOL feedback, all towards the opportunity prioritization. And this is just a little bit of a breakdown of what is the assessment? What are we looking at? And this is actually really critical for the innovators to understand, because all of these pieces are taken into account and it relates to the intellectual property that you are protecting. So innovators should understand what is the unmet need. What is the unmet need out there? If you're going after a particular indication, for example, clinicians in the field who are prescribing to patients with that particular disease and indication have an unmet need. They might know it. Do you know it? And does your invention, does your product meet that unmet need? So the second one here is product solution. So are you solving a need? And do you understand what your product is? Does it solve that unmet need? The next thing we look at is market sizing. We have a lot of resources for doing this, reports, et cetera. We look at the competitive landscape. This is another really important one for innovators to understand when they're thinking about their inventions and determining if they're valuable, et cetera, is not only the unmet need, but what are the competitors out there doing? So the competitors can be, if you're working on a therapeutic in a particular indication, other therapeutics on the market right now for that indication, other treatments on the market right now, or even other therapies that might even not be products, such as maybe physical therapy to treat whatever it is that you're doing. It's also things that are in the pipeline. So things that are in development, maybe in phase 1, phase 2, et cetera. And so thinking about the competitive landscape, thinking about the unmet need, and then thinking about your product and your solution and how they meet those things and how they compare to the competitive landscape. So the next thing we do is the customer discovery, feedback. It's an iterative process. All of this together leads us to put in place an IP strategy, which is determining, well, how do we protect this thing that we have determined now is valuable? And then again, how much resources to put into protecting this particular invention. And it can vary greatly. And so we need to know what is the best way to do it. Is it a copyright approach? Is it is there a trademark? Is a package between a copyright and a patent? Is it just a patent? How broadly do we want a patent? And how do we want a patent? And then we look at the business model. We plan a go-to-market strategy. So all of this together is part of what we do. So focusing on you guys, the innovators, so you all are creating valuable innovations. What should you focus on to create value? The folks before me talked about protecting, but I want to talk a little bit about not just protecting, but creating valuable things to protect. So again, what you should think about, well, what is the problem? Do you truly understand what the problem is? Can you define it clearly? Is this something that's confirmed by folks out there on the front lines? What is the unmet need? So again, have you spoken with frontline clinicians? Is that something that we can help with? Are there reports? Are there things that we can look at to identify that? Have you developed a solution to the problem? Does your invention actually address the problem that you've identified? Sometimes we see, innovation is best when it starts with a problem or unmet need and solves it. It's harder when you have a solution in search of a problem. And sometimes we see this, folks will have an academic discovery, it's interesting science, but maybe that's not connected to an actual problem to be solved. And you want to ask yourself questions, why? Why is this needed? Why will anyone use it? Why will anyone pay for it? Why will anyone prefer this solution to some other solution? So I talked about competition, what's currently in the market and the pipeline. And another one is cost. So, you want your solution to be cost effective. Again, why? So what are valuable innovations? So number one is solutions to problems that no one has solved before. Compositions of matter. You might hear this a lot, especially in the therapeutic space. Composition of matter is key. Platforms. So platforms are sort of broader innovations that are a new way, a new modality or way of solving a problem that could be applied more broadly. There's also methods of use. So you may not have a composition, somebody else might have it, but maybe you have a new use for it. There's data and materials, which we haven't totally talked about, but that can also be very valuable. Content and copyright, and then finally know-how. So know-how is not necessarily protectable by copyright, not necessarily protectable by patents, but it's something that that other folks don't and can be used to help develop a particular product. So invention disclosure. So they talked a little bit about, well, what happens before you get that patent filed? And to be clear, we do not, it's not you all that it's going to be filing the patent applications and filing all this. You'll be working with our office, and our office will be filing them on behalf of the university. But in order to do that, we have to be talking with you, and we have to know what to file on. And so that's the invention disclosure process. The step one is you say, hey, I have an invention. I need to disclose it to the OTMA. And there is a link down there. That is the website where you can go to disclose. That is our disclosure portal. It's all online. There's also a QR code you can use to find it there. And so you fill out this form online. It will ask you things about what is your invention, what are the applications, what's the competition, all of that. Who are the sponsors, who are the inventors, all very important things to understand obligations and third-party rights, and a host of other questions. So timing, when do you do this? Invention disclosure is step one here in this entire process they're all talking about. Step one is disclosing the invention. When do you do it? We ask at least 2 months before public disclosure. We prefer even earlier, but at a minimum 2 months before public disclosure. What is public disclosure? This is very important. So public disclosure is publication in a journal, an online post, anything on bioRxiv, anything on the web, any presentation, poster, abstract, meeting, conversation, anything with somebody outside of UCSF, in which you have disclosed information that will help the other, enabling information, as we call it, that will help the other person actually make or do your invention. So all of that stuff, before you do any of that, you come talk to us, submit a disclosure, and work with us to see about putting protection in place. So the other thing is when you have reduced an invention to practice. Sometimes you might have an idea, but you haven't done it, and you're just thinking about it. That might take a while. If you have actually reduced it to practice, meaning you have done it, that is a great time to disclose. Another one is when you've developed a solution. So we talked those problem solution. If you developed a solution, come talk to us. Or you've developed content that you think is valuable, come talk to us. So if there's one message that you get out of this entire meeting today, if you are interested in starting a company, if you have an idea you think is exciting, if you're interested in technology licensing, if you think you have valuable protectable IP, contact the OTMA. So we have an email address, in addition to the invention disclosure form, a generic email address, innovation@ucsf.edu. That gets, anything coming into there gets sent to one of us. We also have our lovely colleagues, Stasha and Lorraine, for example, who are with the EOD group. So within OTMA, there are a couple different groups. These folks are on the front end of invention disclosures, and they not only receive the new invention disclosures and can talk to you about your invention, but they also participate in the outreach to in the pre-disclosure process. So if you have any questions, you don't even have to have a disclosure. If you just have a question, you want to talk about maybe having an invention, maybe wondering about what to do, these would be the folks to contact. So that's it that I have prepared for today. Again, our website, the General Innovation Ventures website, and then another QR code that links to OTMA's Market First Approach and Startup Services.
Kristin, thank you very much. We're going to have Q&A, so I'm going to turn the screen off here, and we're going to shift the camera over. I think Brian's around here somewhere. So we'll bring the chairs over into the middle of the room here. We also have questions on Zoom coming in because we have quite an audience on Zoom right now. I'm going to ask one question right off the bat. Does everybody know what composition matter, what that phrase means? Because we could start with that as a question. Let's just ask for that question to be answered. It was such a great phrase.
I don't know.
Does this work?
Oh, it's working.
Okay, good. All right. So composition matter is the tangible thing, like the drug, the antibody, the device, right? You are claiming for patent purposes, right? You're claiming the thing, right? As opposed to a method, right? So we'll do an example. Composition of matter is, I'm going to stick with that anti-PD-1 antibody. I don't know why. It's stuck in my brain, right? Method of use would be method of treating a particular cancer with the antibody.
Thank you. Some of the terms we use, just like in your lab, the terms you use would be completely foreign to me. So if you hear terms here tonight, you want to get the most out of this. So just ask, what does that mean? All right. Do we have any questions in the audience to start with?
We have one on Zoom that can get the party started.
I'm going to also start while you're getting that teed up. It sounds really like an onerous process, but the most important thing is to ask the question, because many of you are saying, oh my gosh, I've already talked about it. Well, if that's true, let's go ahead and get that information over to OTMA. Or, gosh, my poster's due tomorrow or tonight at midnight. So start getting it in your head that your ideas are valuable and you want to figure out what's the right way to protect them. Not to hold on to them, because you remember you want to disseminate them and have them have a benefit, but to have the leverage in the process of doing that. So start thinking about those things. The other thing to think about is companies are now coming right to investigators, right to the PIs who are sort of unarmed in the fight, in terms, not the fight, but in the conversation. So make sure you understand that there's a way to talk about ideas without giving away the ability for someone else to do them, but there's also a process for getting an NDA in place. And if you're asked to sign things like that, you're actually not allowed to. So I think maybe, Kristin, you could address that topic.
Yeah.
I'm bringing these up because these are common problems that we hear about with
You
faculty.
could also say what an NDA and a CDA is, because I'm sure someone's like, yeah, I never heard that abbreviation.
So
Great.
these are all very good questions, and thanks for bringing them up. CDA is confidential disclosure agreement. NDA is non-disclosure agreement. We use them interchangeably, but primarily if you want to talk to somebody about something that could be a valuable invention who is outside of the university. So I said, come to us if you have a disclosure, but also come to us if you want to talk with somebody outside. We can put the confidential disclosure agreements in place. So the CDAs or NDAs that can protect that conversation that you have outside of the university. Another thing to think about is, is a CDA sufficient to cover what you want to talk about? Sometimes yes, and maybe sometimes no. CDAs are really only as strong as you're willing to enforce them. The better thing is to have a provisional or at least a patent application on file to protect whatever it is that is valuable before you go talk outside. You can also talk in a non-confidential way, which is really how many of these conversations initially start with folks outside the university. So basically, if you have an exciting composition of matter invention that involves a compound with an exciting new structure, this is actually really easy to talk about because you don't disclose the structure, right? So you say, hey, I have this really exciting compound A, and here's maybe some data that, it can accomplish this thing. But you haven't disclosed anything about what it is at all, right? Some other inventions are trickier. Methods of use you can't really say, hey, I've got this great new way of using compound X to do A, B, C. You've just given it away.
Or you just say, but I can't tell you what it does. It's really good.
And then I'm not interested.
Right. The other thing you might want to talk about is materials transfer agreements, because what I see on my side, right, like basically don't send stuff to people, right, without some agreement.
Right. So we talked briefly about data and materials. And materials are also intellectual property. All of that's owned by the university. When you send it outside, you need to have a material transfer agreement for transferring it to whoever. That basically sets up the basic terms of that transfer, which is ownership hasn't changed. You're going to do X, Y, Z. We're protected in case you do something with it. Those things. When you're transferring things to other universities, there's a very simple agreement that gets put in place. If you're transferring them to companies, it might be a little bit more complex. There may or may not be fees involved. There may or may not be other certain restrictions involved in what a company can or can't do with whatever it is that you're sending to them.
Great. All right. We have a few questions coming in on Zoom, and everyone in the audience, please, you're encouraged to ask questions as well. First one comes up. When filing a patent for a medical device, is it necessary to demonstrate a functional phenotype, or are detailed design specifications and dimensions sufficient for patent approval?
Wow, that's a pretty intense question. No, I mean, it's a good one. Medical device patenting is a little different than, for example, therapeutics or what have you. A lot of device patents are simply drawings of the device, and you actually don't put in data about the working device. It doesn't mean that you can't, and there may be situations where you'd want to distinguish it from a device that was pretty close, right? You've made an improvement on something, but often they actually don't have anything in them except a bunch of like stick figures.
Great. This question might be best for Kristin. And I know this is something that we talk about at Innovation Ventures all the time. So Kristin, how does becoming an innovator or starting a company at UCSF impact one's position as a faculty member?
I think I'm going to actually transfer this to Einor.
Well, it depends on your funding and your chairperson. Actually, this is what we're trying to help with, is developing frontline innovators, whether it's a clinician innovator or a scientist innovator or an educator innovator. So it can be very beneficial, but it can also be a bit stressful if you are in a department where they value clinical care, education, and research, such as is pretty standard in our merit system, but they don't quite get innovation, but other departments actually really do. And you come talk to us and we'll help you frame it. The other bit is around funding, because those things have really pretty structured funding mechanisms, where innovation, the funding aspect of that is more nuanced and more challenging. So our next session is actually on funding your innovation work at UCSF. That'll be in February. So the answer is, how does it affect you as a faculty member? We think it can affect you in a very, very positive way. And we're here to support you in that. But it's not without challenges, because you're going to be taking an uncharted course. And we're trying to make that a much smoother process for you. So we really encourage it. And we think career development is an important part of all the work we do. As I said earlier, we want to help develop innovators, not just the innovations, because then that keeps it all flourishing. But I'm happy to talk to anyone who specifically asked that question. So the answer is, less generic and more specific to you, just reach out to me.
Any questions in the room?
Question about just in general for IP, is it better when you're filing that provisional to have it be as broad as you possibly think you can get reasonably within a year, or to be a little bit more narrow and add different provisionals if you have additional data?
My guess is if you asked each three of us, we'd have a slightly different flavor, right? Because everyone has their own way of doing it. It depends what the purpose of the filing is, right? And so I can speak from my perspective, which is not a university perspective. So keep that in mind, right? So you might file patents for at least three reasons as a small startup, right? One of them would be to protect your innovation. The other is defensive, which is I don't want someone to block me, so I'm going to put the idea out there first. That doesn't mean I'm going to be able to own it or get claims on it, but no one else is going to be able to file on it or at least get a patent on it, because patents are, if someone's already put that thing out there, you can't patent something that's already out there. So that's the second reason. And the third biggest reason is investors. Okay, so getting money outside the university from private investors like venture capitalists, depending on who those folks are, some folks want to see really broad patents, some want to see more narrow. And so you kind of need to tailor it. I think I'll speak my perspective from the university, but I'd be curious for both of you. I think you have to be realistic, right? You can shoot yourself in the foot if you go too broad, but if you get too narrow, and I'll give you an example without naming names, and it's not UC at all, okay? That's the only clue you get. Okay, it was an enzyme, and they literally patented the exact amino acid sequence. But it's an enzyme that's pretty flexible to mutation. So it's so easy. So, okay, you own that particular enzyme, but I can make the same thing and make one amino acid change. Now I can do it. Your patent doesn't mean anything. That's a little too narrow. Oh, I'll let you go next.
Yeah, I'd agree with especially with number 1 and number 3. So with the university, of course, when you think about patenting, one thing to think about is what is the purpose of it? It's to prevent others from practicing. Right? They're really, and why would you do that? Because you're protecting a commercial product that you're trying to develop or own or and license out of the university, at least from our perspective. So, we want to cover that to enable all of these other steps. We wouldn't necessarily be filing on things that we don't have purposes. That's probably not consistent, with what we would do here. But that's the main thing. We use outside counsel. Our outside counsel generally follows a certain pattern where you try to get broad claims that are, they're probably more than what you think you're going to get. And then you build in backup positions. It's kind of like a funnel that narrows down to what you think you're definitely going to get. That's the very specific thing. And then, as they said, it's a negotiation with the patent office. And so you don't know where you're going to end up. And you just, you try.
I agree with all of that. I would just add that I don't actually do any patent prosecution, but I see everything on the other end at the litigation phase. And so one thing I'll say is if the option is to file a really broad provisional that you think you'll never get the claims because you're going to give a talk the very next morning on the exact concept and you just really need something in place, do that because it's better than having nothing. But from a litigator's perspective, in 20 years or 15 years, when it's really valuable, everything you said at the patent office can and will be used against you in a court of law. And so if you've gone very, very broad and then represented to the patent office that your invention is very, very broad, that opens you up to a lot more prior art and it can cause you problems down the road. The other thing I tell people is if you're in a lawsuit over your invention, that means you did something right. So, you may not care at that point because probably there's the potential to make a lot of money, but always you're better off filing something broad if you just need protection really quickly.
Thank you. I'm going to take moderator's prerogative and go back to one of the questions that we had before because it was actually a two-part question. It was, how does becoming an innovator or starting a company affect one's position as a faculty member? Those are really two different things. Starting a company if it's technology that's spun out of the university and you want to go outside with the company and help form the company and develop it, I think that's the second part of this question. And for all of us, whether it's your company or you're consulting for a company, we have really strict guidelines around conflict of interest and conflict of commitment. And those are well spelled out. I say they're well spelled out, but the interpretation can be fuzzy, and it can be really important for you to reach out to those committees that you can get a lot of support for that, but we can also help guide you on that. Basically, if it's your technology that's been spun out, you're an inventor, and somehow you might be benefiting from that, then you shouldn't be the PI on any further validation. You could work on it, but not as the PI on any further validation on that in-house. And so these are all things that are a little bit nuanced, but there are some bright lines around them. So I think it's a really great question. I think it is a two-part question. An in-house innovator, a frontline innovator where you stay in and become a serial innovator, those questions are pretty straightforward. But if you're going to step out with the company, or you're going to have a role in a company or get paid by an outside company, that's when you really need to pay attention to the conflict of interest and conflict of commitment rules. And we're happy to help advise on that.
Any questions in the room? Yes, Brenda.
Yeah, I had actually the same question as him, but just related to DNA sequences.
Could
but
you speak up a little bit? We have overhead mics, but
Yeah.
just elevate a little.
No, previously I just had a similar question to him related to DNA sequences for like gene therapies or cell therapies. But I guess another question that I had was, how often do people decide to publish their work? If they're trying to use the technology that they developed to spin out a company, or I guess if disclose it to you guys, do they wait like many years after, or do some just never publish it, or how does that?
So this question will be answered differently if the person answering it is at a company versus a university. So, as a university, our mission is to do research, put it out there, publish, et cetera, right? And so you will often see these innovators publishing, even if they're starting companies. The key is, of course, protecting the inventions and protecting the innovations prior to publication. I can't recall. Maybe there's an instance, but I can't really recall one in which something that actually spun out into a successful company was not published. The publication is actually helpful, and it can be helpful part of the marketing and spreading the word and getting the other scientific community, your colleagues in industry, your colleagues elsewhere excited about the technology. So publications can actually be very valuable. That the key is really the timing and getting everything protected before you do so.
Yeah, and I'll just say that is quite a tension in being in a university and being an innovator. It just is, right? And it will continue to be if, for example, you have a role at the university and a small company, right? Because the mission of the university is to publish and share, right? And that should not change. But the rules right now are you have to, and I think Pilar, talked about this, you have to file first, meaning you have to file for that provisional application before you publish, right? And that's publish anything, whether it's bioarchive or, you just put your poster up at a meeting. And that can be difficult sometimes, right? To figure out how to do that timing. And sometimes you don't realize it's too late. And I think this goes back to Einar's know your value, right? So a lot of, I could date myself and say back in the day when I was in grad school at Berkeley, right, we didn't do any of this, right? I'm not sure there were a lot of biotech companies, that's the gray hair. But, now what ends up happening is professors, postdocs, grad students, you look back at your work, right? It might be your thesis, it might be some presentation you gave. And then you're like, oh, there's an invention there because I didn't come talk to Kristin and her folks. Well, by that point, it's too late for in some cases. There is some grace period in the US, believe it or not, where you can publish and then you have a year to file on it. But if you want rights in other parts of the world, then that will be important for starting up a company or working, with companies worldwide. Like Europe, there is no forgiveness if you publish it. And by publish it, it can be your thesis in a library. Europe's like, you're not getting a patent on that anymore, right? That ship sailed. And so that's why that poster that says, talk to us, super, super important.
I'd like to add to that.
Oh, yeah.
The worst thing that can happen is they say, no, you can't have that as an invention. And then you go on with whatever it was you were going to do. But
Better to talk.
better to talk to someone and find that out now.
So our philosophy with it is that we follow your lead in terms of what you want to do academically. So, your academic career is important, and if you have a plan to publish, you let us know beforehand. We adjust our schedules and timelines basically according to that. So that's just the key. Let us know and give us a heads up.
And I think for some people, we all come in very altruistic to health and life sciences, and we want to do for the good of the whole. So this may sound a little antithetical to that mission, but it's not, because even things that go out for the good of the whole, even if they go out as nonprofit, we've talked a lot about commercialization, but everything that you want to try to scale, if it doesn't have a sustainable business model, it's going to die at the end of the next grant. So even if you say, look, I want this to all be open source and just for the good of the whole and for anyone, just examine the model with OTMA and figure out, if you could protect any part of it, where does that give you leverage in terms of being able to say, I want this to grow and I want this to get to more and more people. And if you can still do that through nonprofit or foundation, et cetera, but at least you have the ability to have something that you can license and that you can actually help navigate and scale. Otherwise, you don't have any leverage if you haven't done any of those steps. I don't know if you want to add to that, but
Yeah.
I know there's a tension oftentimes in our frontline innovators in that.
I can add something to that, which is, if you think about whatever your innovation is that you want to take to the public, if any investment at all is needed to develop it and get it there, that investment has to come from somewhere, and that investment usually depends on it having been protected, right? If it's not protected, if it's just open to the public, it's unlikely to get developed and actually become a product for anybody to use.
I was just gonna add one thing. You probably said this, but I don't know, if a provisional application, the public never sees that unless you get into litigation, in which case, like I said, lucky you, because unless you're the person using someone else's invention, if you are the one whose invention is being used, great. That means that it was worth some money. But the provisional, you have that 12 to 18 months before it publishes. And so even if you published an application, no one's going to see the provisional that you have that protected that until something gets published by the patent office.
I just realized there's been a question on Zoom here. Did you have something else to add to that, Erica? Okay, great. Sorry.
Holding the microphone.
Apologize to the Zoom questioner for waiting so long. For discovery and repurposing FDA-approved drugs, what is the patent filing process like at UCSF? When to file an application? Are there any complications with the pharmaceutical company holding the patent on the drug if it's still brand name?
Well, do you want to answer the
I'll take a
UCSF,
stab.
and I'll talk about the repurposing?
So in terms of the process, it's really the same process, right? Repurposing an FDA-approved drug, that's kind of what we're talking about. That's a method of use invention, a method of use application. So it'll be the same thing, to disclose your idea or your invention to our office, then, we'll walk you through the process. If that, method of use, the reason that I say composition of matter patents are so valuable is you own that composition of matter. Method of use can be a little bit tricky because somebody else owns that composition of matter. So if we were to try to commercialize that method of use application, we might license that patent application to another company, but that company might have to go get a license to the original company that owns the composition of matter, that original drug, which complicates things. It doesn't mean that we it doesn't mean that we can't get that application necessarily. It doesn't mean that it won't be successful. It just makes it a little bit more challenging.
Maybe I'll just comment on patenting repurposing because this tends to come up a lot, right? Because you work with a fair amount of drugs, right? And clinicians often discover new uses for those drugs, and those new uses can be really valuable. Sometimes the drug is not patented, even if it's out there commercially, right? It's a generic at this point. And so you're patenting that new method. That has its challenges too, right? Because the drug itself is not protected at all. You can use it, but then so can everyone else. The other situation is that someone else owns the drug. Well, maybe your invention is going to be interesting to them, right? So they're a potential source. So I'll just say it is a challenging way to get investment these days, but definitely doable.
Do we have any other questions in the room? I think I saw a couple hands. Yes.
I think I have a question. One in the slides, you'll talk about the NDA and the patent. So I'm not quite sure what is the difference between those, because previously when I go to some conference, I saw people, if asked for NDA, they said none. So I'm not quite sure what exactly that means. And also I have a question. If for instance, I file a patent within UCSF, later on, is that I'm the only person to operate the patent, or UCSF together with me to operate the patent?
Okay, I'll take a little stab at a little bit, and then I think Kristin has to probably answer a lot of this. So NDA, non-disclosure agreement, is literally like an agreement, right, that the university signs, and let's just pretend Merck wanted to find out about something, and they would sign, right? And basically, it's a promise by the company signing it, or the other person signing it, that whatever you tell them is going to stay confidential, and that they're not going to use it for purposes that it wasn't intended. So pretend that you have a really cool compound, and you're finally going to tell Merck what it is so they can decide if they're going to invest. Well, that non-disclosure agreement, or NDA, is a promise by Merck that they're going to listen to your stuff, decide if they want the drug or not, and then if they decide like, hey, we're not working together, they got to forget everything and rip everything up. Patents, right, are just a totally different sphere, right? They are basically a negotiation between, in this case, the university and the patent office, right, which sort of sits in not Washington, D.C. They actually have a little side office in San Jose, not that you need to know that. But anyway, it's a negotiation. And then it's like literally, I should have brought a picture of a patent, right? But it's like this, very densely worded document that will put you to sleep, that at the end of it has these numbered claims that say what the university owns, which will be my last point before I hand off to Kristin. The patents that you file through her office are owned by the regents, right, by the UC system. They are not owned by you individually. The good part is, as an inventor, your name goes on that front page, which is totally cool for like a resume.
Yes, this is a very good question. I don't know if you have access to, I had 2 additional slides.
Yep.
But yes, so
It's going to be bright, though.
This is the next one.
Yep.
I'm short enough. No,
Yeah,
I see it's here.
So what happens if you are an inventor? So here at the university, you submit a disclosure to our office. The office files a patent application. The Regents of the University of California owns the patent application, but you are a named inventor on it. So what does that do other than you can put it on your resume, et cetera? Well, one thing is you get licensing income if we ever actually license it to a company. So of all the income the university gets, it's split this way. So the inventors on a particular patent that is licensed get 35% of whatever the university gets. You get money shared back with you, which is always nice, right? And important to know, and that would become personal income. Now, you asked about, can you operate? Can you do it, basically, what is in the patent? And the university holds the patent. So while you're here at the university, of course, you can do whatever. Anybody here at the university can operate under it. But if you wanted to go somewhere else, to another company, and do something that's covered by the patents that the university owns, that other company would need to take a license from UCSF, basically the regions, to practice.
And that would include if you started a company and left the university, just.
Yes.
And this brings up a point that hasn't come up yet, but oftentimes it's asked, how many people in the room are students? Great, or learners? Yeah, thank you. A lot of students, if you're paying to attend the university, there are slightly different rules. Those of us who are employed by the university, there's no question everything we think is owned by the university, and so our inventions would go through Kristin's office. For students, there's a little bit of a gray zone unless you're being paid to be here. But if you're paying to be here, there's a slightly different rule. If you invented something and you don't use any university resources. So not even subject matter experts here, not the computer here, not the phone. Who uses the phone? But nothing here. I didn't say fax, at least. But you don't use any university resources. You do all of that work outside of here. That's pretty hard to prove if you're a learner here and you're here as much as you are. The other thing is it's a little bit short-sighted. So some people say, I don't want the university to get any of my invention. This is my idea. I'm a student. I can do this. You can. However, in this university with health and life sciences, it's really to your advantage to leverage the fertile soil you're in here and the great access to OTMA, because they can really help facilitate and make sure your idea really gets to impact. So that's a discussion to think about. We often advise on those topics. And if you're in that kind of a mindset and you want to think about that, be sure to reach out and talk to us about it.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that point, that's a good point. I know we say, the university owns it, which is the Regents of the University of California. That's based on the employment contract. So when you first join the university and you sign, day one, whatever it is, your employment contract, that's how that happens. So if you're not actually employed in any way, right, then as she said, the rules are a little different, but there's also the aspect of resources. So even if you're not employed, but you're here and you're using the resources, the university may still own it.
Are there any more questions? Yeah, good.
Thank you for being so thorough about the information. So one question I have is about the marketplace. So while developing the idea, you mentioned that you would be like testing things in marketplace. What that would be like? Can you define more what marketplace would be? Maybe it's a broader question, but like how if the idea is protected during that time. And the second thing is about the business model. Like UC helps like with the development of the business model, but also like you guys support the existing business models, like refine them. Is that the case? Yeah.
Yeah, so okay, two-part question. See if I can remember it all. Let me answer the second one first. So the business model. Some inventions have a very straightforward business model. So a straight-up therapeutic has, defined path to the market. You go into the clinic, phase 1, phase 2, FDA, et cetera. Pharma company, insurance reimbursement, et cetera, right? It's not too complicated. Other kinds of inventions may be some sort of software or an app might have more complicated business models. And you have to think about, well, how is this company going to put this product on the market? How are they going to get revenue? How are they going to structure all of these kind of things? So that's kind of what we mean about different business models. And so, sometimes folks will come in and not really know. They have this really cool idea, but they don't really know how to get it to market, how to structure the company, how to create the business model. And that's where folks on our team can help with that and provide feedback on that. And we have experienced XIRs, entrepreneurs that we work with in this space that can provide feedback, and other folks that have done this before. And so that's on the business model aspect. And your first question, remind me.
It's about the marketplace, like how
the market,
is it used and how it's going to be developed, but at the same time, will it be protected or?
Yeah, so when we say we test the market, this has to do with our industry contacts and key opinion leaders that we talk with regularly. And we can put together what we call non-confidential descriptions or, sort of one-pagers that describe an invention non-confidentially. Meaning like taking out sort of that key things, such as the structure, which you wouldn't put in there anyways, or maybe if whatever it is, taking that key thing out and saying, hey, you folks who are experts in industry, if there was an invention that accomplished these purposes, whatever the purposes might be, not saying what the invention is. If there was an invention that did this and this for this particular disease, in this particular area, is this commercially interesting? Right? So you can get a lot of feedback without actually telling them anything that's going to give it away. And then you can also go, the next step later is after maybe we filed a provisional, so we don't always, know what's going to work. You file a provisional application. And you can go out and talk to folks who say, yeah, I'm really interested in your invention. Tell me more. Put a CDA in place, and then you can actually talk with them more in depth about it and get feedback that way. So there are different ways of testing the market.
Can I add one very cynical perspective from a litigator's perspective, going back to the question about the difference between an NDA and a patent? One thing that they have in common is that neither one is self-executing in terms of you don't get automatic protection from either of them. They're out there in the world, they protect you, but you still have to know if someone has breached them. You have to enforce it. So you want to know your market. You want to be, if you disclose something to a company, you want to watch what that company does after you've disclosed that information to them, because it's possible they will not do what they said they did. And I hate to be that cynical person, but I've just seen it way too many times. So, when you're thinking about disclosing something, is there a way you can tie it to a provisional application? Can you tie it to a patent you already own, and then further inventions of that? Something like that. Is there some way you can concretely describe it to protect yourself better in your NDA? With a patent, it's a little bit easier because at least the patent office has a description. It's very clear whether it can be clear if someone's infringing it. Obviously, there's a whole lawsuit about that, but they just don't automatically protect you, is sort of my point.
And it is very exciting when a company wants to talk to you and they think you have great ideas, et cetera. And I see someone here in scrubs, so I might just make an assumption, but this can happen in the operating room with equipment reps. And all of a sudden you're telling them, look, I figured out a way to do this easier, better, or whatever. And they're taking those ideas right back to their company. And so it is just, keep in mind, it's exciting when people think you have great ideas, and you all have great ideas. So know that bit about your value. And there are very, very few emergencies in talking to companies. So take the time to come to the office and ask for advice and get the right forms in place.
Kind of going off of that, I think many of us have applied for grants or applications to fellowships and things of that nature. And I think part of that is proposing new ideas. And I'm wondering if you guys have advice on how to go about sharing those ideas and not disclosing too much. I think that's something that everybody goes through during transition processes.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing and then I'll pass it to Kristin. So my understanding is for most grants, right, the grant itself, right, and all the details you put in are not public. There are parts that become public if you are given the grant money, and I'm talking from a U.S. grant, right? Private grants are different. So if you're applying to like NIH or NSF, some of those abstracts and parts become public, but the major part doesn't. So I mean, from my perspective, clients, right, most of my clients have grants as well as VC funding and such. And, again, we sometimes file provisionals before that. I don't know that the university would, so I'll let you comment on that. I will say one other thing. Private granting fund is very different, right? And sometimes, I'll give you an example. I have one right now. It's actually called BioMade. I think it comes out of the Defense Department. Big contributors to that actually get certain IP rights and access to information from other companies. So just read the booklets they send.
That's a good point. So federal grants, U.S. federal grants, like most grants, are considered confidential when you apply for them. So the application itself is confidential. But if they are granted, say an NIH grant, et cetera, if they are granted, that grant might become public, and parts of it might become public. There's Freedom of Information Acts, et cetera. People can access them. And so There is actually in the NIH application, and I think maybe the other federal ones, they give you the opportunity, there's a little box that can be checked that says that, hey, something in here is confidential and I actually don't want this made public. And then you can tell them what it is and they can and will redact it out. So that's important to know when you're filing grant applications. If you think your grant application has something that you think is a really exciting invention, to market and cover that, but also let us know. So, you know, it's a long time from application to actually granting the money. And if you don't, as you know, you don't always get the grant, right? And so it's good to be in communication with us and say, hey, I filed this grant application. And, you know, maybe in 9 months or so, we'll know one way or the other. And maybe that might help us determine a timeline for filing a patent application.
Can I add one thing? That I think that's a great question because I have actually had this come up in a case where I had to defend a SBIR grant, so a small business grant, and only because whoever applied for it, you know, I'm way downstream, so I don't know who did it, but they put little asterisks by everything that was confidential, and so we could go through. So I would just say be aware when you're filing the grant for how that particular person that you're applying to, how they expect you to tell them things are confidential, because this was very specific, and you could go through and point out each thing.
Great. We're getting close to time, so we're going to wrap up with one question here. So continue. Thanks for this great discussion. There seems to be a couple questions around inventorship. So I'm going to read both of these questions because they're kind of connected. Maybe the response could be blended as well. So are the PIs/faculty members usually the ones who decide who can be listed as an inventor? Then similarly, if the idea and work that somebody is working under a PI or a faculty member, how should one allocate their inventor percentage?
Okay, so there's not a percentage. I mean, there was in this money thing. I don't know how you do that, so I'm going to skip that part. Inventorship is a legal determination, and the only people who should be determining inventorship are patent attorneys, whether it's the university's outside counsel or, you know, my clients have counsel. And why? Because inventorship is all about who came up with the ideas as represented in the patent claims, right? So you have to understand the patent claims and then figure out from there who contributed. So you can be an inventor on a patent if you contributed only one idea that made it into the patent claims, or you might be contribute all. You don't have to contribute everything. You can have multiple people who had to contribute to get to that one idea. What tends to get people really confused is the difference between inventorship and authorship, right? So when I was a grad student, right, PI, always last author on the paper, person first author was usually who did the most work or whatever. It probably depends on the lab, right? And then there were like a whole bunch of names in the middle. I have no idea how those were, you know, sorted out. And then so let's say you have that situation. Not all those people listed are usually inventors. Why? Because doing things with just your hands, being the person who's in the lab, doesn't necessarily qualify you as an inventor. If you just, for example, someone gave you a protocol, like say you were a technician in a lab and your job was simply to follow the protocol and turn the results over, you would not be an inventor, even though you've done a great amount of work and you should be given, you know, maybe contribution on the publication or some other means. On the flip side, you can be someone who gives a good deal of ideas that go into the claims and never touch anything in the lab and be an inventor. And it tends to be very confusing to scientists. When I was a scientist, I thought it was really confusing to patent attorneys. It's pretty straightforward. So usually what's done, at least in my outside world, is that, you know, whether it's me or another patent attorney sits down with the people who worked on the project and we ask them specific questions, you know, going through the patent claims and say, okay, who came up with this structure? Who came up with this method, right? And sometimes it's, you know, more, like I said, it's a little more convoluted, and sometimes one person is like, it's all me, but it's something we do at the outset. Do you guys do something similar?
So in our invention disclosures, whoever is actually doing the disclosure will mark down who they think the inventors are. And usually if it's, everybody seems to agree that these are the inventors, this is kind of what we go with. If there's a question, if somebody says, I don't know, maybe so-and-so should or shouldn't be an inventor, then we go through what she's described as an inventorship review. We can't do it for every single thing all the time. It can be very expensive, right? So, but if there is a question, then we will, engage our outside counsel again to talk with all of the inventors or folks who are claiming to be inventors, and work through what they actually contributed to the claims of the invention. And then they will make a determination.
Great. Pilar, Erica, Kristin, thank you very, very much. This was a wonderful, fantastic primer that was only surpassed by the discussion. So thank you very much for that, Einar. Thank you very much for your leadership on these. We really appreciate it. And so we'll continue to keep nourishing UCSF Innovators. You all are a big part of it. And I'm going to... Oh, yes. After this session, I will send the recording and the slide deck, as well as the link to register for the next seminar. As Einar mentioned, we're taking a break in January, but we're coming back in full force. It's going to be a really good topic in February. We think it's going to be very popular, of funding your innovation at UCSF.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Please take food.